Okay, so we're gonna make pizza, and we're gonna start obviously with the dough. And so right now it's Friday morning, and I'm gonna want my pizza tomorrow night, so I'm making the dough today. I actually find with this particular pizza dough recipe, usually 2 to 3 days before you want to use it is gives me the best flavor and extensibility, which is, you know, that nice stretchiness that we want from pizza dough. So I just didn't feel like making it last night, so we're doing it this morning and we're gonna have it tomorrow. So let's get going. Really simple to start. We're just gonna use 16.5 ounces, a little over a pound of bread flour. So that's got, you know, a lot of protein in it, which is gonna maximize our gluten formation, which means we're gonna get nice stretchy dough. We're gonna add, let's see, 2 teaspoons of sugar, which is a little bit of food for our yeast. Although there's already plenty in there for them in that flour, just a little bit more. I'm gonna add 1/2 teaspoon of instant yeast, and I just use this SAF instant yeast. I just keep these in the freezer. I mean, this is about $6, and it's enough yeast to make about 100 loaves of bread. Way more economical than buying the packets that you get in the grocery store, and it pretty much is freezer stable for, you know, years. So I'm going to use about 1/2 teaspoon of yeast. And I'm not going to add the salt yet because this recipe features a technique called autolyze, which is, at least that's how I pronounce it, which is you're just basically mixing the dry ingredients, the flour, without the salt, just long enough to hydrate it. So you're gonna mix in the water and then you're gonna let it rest for a period of time. And the gluten development is actually gonna start, and you're gonna do that before the kneading process, and that's gonna help improve the texture and the elasticity of the dough. So I'm just gonna mix the dry ingredients. And then I've got 1 1/3 cups of cold water. So I'm gonna run my food processor. I'm gonna add the water. And I just wanna add it slowly. And really all I'm looking to do here is incorporate all the water. And then just mix to the point that there's no dry flour remaining. I'm not kneading the dough yet, I'm just adding the water. So about 10 seconds now. Looks like there's no dry flour left, so I'm gonna turn it off, and now I'm just gonna let that rest for 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes is up, and our autolyze period is over. And actually what's really interesting is you can already, the dough is already, you know, it's smoother, the texture's already changed in just that 10 minutes of time. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a little bit of olive oil, actually 1 tablespoon, and we're gonna add the salt. So I'm gonna use 2.5 teaspoons of kosher salt and 1 tablespoon of olive oil. So add the oil. And if you were using regular table salt, it would be about 1.5 teaspoons. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this, and it's going to be anywhere from like 30 to 60 seconds. I just want the dough to come together. It should form a nice smooth ball. See it coming together now. It's been about 30 seconds. It's pretty good. So if you look, we got a nice ball of dough. And at this point, the dough is tacky, it's not sticky, so notice it doesn't really stick to my hand when I pull it away, but it is sticky to the touch. That's pretty much exactly what you want. I'm going to take the dough out from under the blade. And now this recipe makes about 2 13-inch or medium-sized pizzas. So what I actually did was I usually double the recipe, which makes about 4 pizzas worth of dough. And if you didn't want to make 4 pizzas, you know, you can always freeze the dough, freeze some of it. So I'm just gonna add my 2 doughs together. And now what's gonna happen is this recipe is designed for at least a 24-hour cold ferment in the refrigerator. And what that's gonna do is it's really going to allow time for the dough to develop and maximize the flavor. So all the yeast and the enzymes are gonna go to work, kind of working in that dough, and you're really gonna get a better flavored dough. It's gonna be better structured, it's gonna be easier to stretch. It's really hard to do that in one day. So you can see the dough is already nice and smooth. I'm gonna add this to my bucket. Just spray a little more oil in there. And I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator. It's gonna rise overnight. And now you can do this anywhere from 1 to 3 days. And I think, 2 to 3 days is usually gives me the absolute best product, but it's gonna be pretty good after just 1 day rise too. So that's gonna go into the fridge until tomorrow, and that's all for now. Okay, so it's been over 24 hours actually. It's Saturday afternoon, and we've got our dough. You can see that it's just about doubled overnight. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to portion this out into 4 pieces, and I'm actually doing this now at 2 o'clock. I want to use the dough tonight at 6, and so I want to make sure that I do this and cut it up and do it, and then have plenty of time for it to rest. So you can see how stretchy the dough is, but what's going to happen here is once I give it a stretch and fold, all that gluten is going to start to, it was all nice and relaxed, it's going to bunch up again, and then the dough is suddenly going to become much harder to stretch. So now that I'm cutting it, portioning it, I'm going to need to give it time to relax again. And I usually like to give it a good 3 to 4 hours once I take it out of the fridge. So once I take it out of the fridge, portion it out, I want to let it rest for about 4 hours before I actually go to make the pizzas, and that's going to help with that extensibility. I'm going to be able to stretch the dough nice and thin because we're basically making thin crust pizza here. So let's see, weigh the dough. We've got 28.7. Cut this in half, and again, if you don't have a scale, it doesn't need to be perfect. You just want 4 pieces that are relatively equal in size. You can see the dough, the structure of the dough, really nice. Dough is nice and smooth. Cut this into about a 14 ounce piece. So each pizza will be a little under a pound of dough. Cut this one in half. And now if I was doing this, making this for tomorrow, so I would let it rise overnight, I would probably portion it out today and then put this back in the fridge overnight, and then tomorrow when I'm ready to use it, you just take it out about 4 hours before you're ready to start. So you're going to see that over the time here, the dough is going to rise. So now what I want to do is I'm just going to form these into balls by rotating and then just tucking the dough under. And what you want to do is you form a nice skin on the top. It should be nice and smooth and form a nice tight ball. You can do it on the counter. And again, that's going to help it keep its shape while it's rising. And now at this point, if you didn't want to use all this, you can take these and you can freeze them just like this. And then when you want to use them, you just take them out of the freezer, let them defrost, and you'd have pizza dough ready to go. What we're going to do is we're going to take those here. I've got a sheet pan that's already prepared, sprayed with some oil. I'm just going to put these on here. flatten them out a little bit. See how they'll kind of spring right back into shape? That's because, again, that gluten is all tangled and tight together. And if you tried to stretch this right now to make pizza, it would be impossible. So these really need to rest for a while in order for that gluten to relax, in order to make this dough nice and stretchy. So I've got some plastic wrap sprayed with some oil, again, just so it doesn't stick. Just cover this loosely. And now we're just going to let this sit out on the counter. Put it over here. And we're going to let that sit. So it's 2 o'clock, and we're going to let that sit till about 6 o'clock, and then we're going to make our pizza. So we'll be back in a couple hours. Okay, so it's actually only been about 3 hours. You can see the dough is definitely risen nicely. These are getting nice and pillowy. I've got some sauce going for my pizza. And since we've got about an hour before we're going to actually bake the pizza, what I'm going to do is I'm going to preheat the oven. So I want to make sure that my rack with my stones is actually as high up in the oven as it can go. And this is actually a trick I learned from Cooks Illustrated, cooking the pizza up at the top of the oven. I think it was Cooks Illustrated. And this dough recipe might actually be a Cooks Illustrated recipe. I can't remember. And then I'm going to preheat the oven for the hottest temperature that it can go, which is 550 degrees. And I'm going to let that go preheat for about an hour, and in about another hour we'll be ready to bake the pizza. All right. Okay, so it's almost 6 o'clock, and you can see that the dough is like totally ready to go here. It's like twice as big as it was a couple of hours ago, and it's risen for about 4 hours. It's nice and pillowy, and it's going to be ready to shape into a pizza. So I've already floured my countertop. I've got a little bit of flour on my hands. Dough is going to be a little bit sticky, but it's got that oil on it on the top and the bottom, so it should be good. And you see how just beautiful this dough is. And now we're going to shape it. So what we want to do, put it down in the flour. Just get a little bit of flour on there. And this is where you kind of do whatever's comfortable. I kind of like to stretch it out a little bit like this. You don't have to be fancy. You don't have to be throwing it around over your head or anything like that. I mean, you can do that if you want to. We'll do it like this, kind of like grab it by the edges and just keep turning it around. And you see how thin that dough is. You see how that great gluten development, you can see kind of like right through it. That's called window painting. That means we got really good gluten development. You want to be careful not to tear it, but I mean, that's going to make just a beautiful thin crust. Nice and crispy on the bottom. Exactly what we're going for. So now that I got this right where I want it, I'm going to transfer it to my peel. I've got a piece of parchment on here. I've used flour on the bottom. I've used cornstarch, but one thing I found, especially, not cornstarch, excuse me, cornmeal. One thing I found with cornmeal is in a 550 degree oven on that stone, you get cornmeal burns all over the bottom of the pizza. It just keeps burning in the oven. It doesn't taste great. It's got kind of a gritty texture. I don't really like it. I also don't like a super floury bottom. So I use parchment paper, which technically is flammable when it gets over 450 degrees, and we're putting it into a 550 degree oven. But because the pizza is going to be covering most of it, it's not really a problem. The edges might get a little blackened. And I just kind of keep stretching it out. And now that it's on here, just make sure it's going to slide right off. No, nothing sticking. You don't want to go to put this in the oven, be sliding it in there and have the dough stick to the peel. Not good.